Hey guys, welcome to a weekly story time. If you like these story time videos, give this video a like, subscribe if you're not already, leave us a comment. All of those things really do help us out here on YouTube. But if you want to support what we're doing even further, get bonus content, a link to our Patreon is down below, so definitely check it out if you're interested. On this week's story time, I want to talk about a recent correction that I received that ended up being a really emotional experience for me. I cry almost every single spanking now. Between the increased intensity and just the emotional vulnerability that I have felt in my relationship recently, I tend to cry. But this particular spanking was more emotional than most. So recently, Kota and I started using corrections to address just being able to manage my mood, my demeanor, my stress levels. Really, anytime that I started to feel myself kind of slip out of my role, feel myself kind of drifting outside of his authority without breaking a rule, I kind of started to feel that, shift within myself, that attitude shift or demeanor shift or just mindset shift. When I started to feel that, I go to Kota and I ask for correction, or if he notices it, he will come to me and give correction just to bring me back under his authority, back into my role, before a rule break happens, before something leads to a punishment potentially. And so that's what we have been using correction for. And so this was no exception. That was absolutely the circumstance around this correction, is that Kota had a really busy week at work that week. He had his normal business hours as well as evening obligations, so there was just a lot going on, and I started to feel a loss of connection to his availability in our relationship. It is more often than not, Kota is home, he's available to, talk to me and give me support and fulfill check-ins and fulfill accountability when it's necessary. And so there is always this very tangible connection to his authority just by his presence in the home. And because that had been kind of taken away through these evening obligations that he had, I started to feel very outside of that connection. And I started to get into the mindset that I needed to handle everything on my own. I needed to, handle the running of the home. I needed to handle my mood. I needed to manage myself. And it started to feel really heavy. I needed Kota to step in, and I needed him to bring me back under his authority, to remind me that I am not alone in this, that it is not my job to take on the burden of managing our home, because that is his role. And looking back on it, he could have justified a punishment for this, because we do have a standard that I am not to assume his role or try to take his authority. And I don't think that I was doing that intentionally, and I think that's why he chose a correction for this versus a punishment, because I wasn't doing that intentionally. I wasn't doing that maliciously. I just felt a burden to fulfill a role because of his physical absence, because he had other things going on that week. And so when he noticed that I was just having this very difficult time within myself, and I was just not as light and joyful and free within my role as a taken in hand, when he started to notice that shift in me, he stepped in and he's like, we're going to do a correction, because I need you to come back under my authority, and I need you to understand that you are stepping outside of your role. And so we got to the point of doing the correction, and it was a lot. And I don't think that it was more than what it typically is as far as the intensity. The time was the same, so it is our shortest spanking in our discipline system. And so he just talked to me beforehand and told me all of the things that I needed to hear. Told me that he is the head of household and I need to be under his authority. And just that talk just primed me to be emotional, because I felt the weight of the burden that I was carrying that didn't belong to me, that I shouldn't have been trying to hold. And so before we even started, I was already crying. I got into position and I just started crying before he even started the spanking. So he started the timer. Our corrections are 4 minutes. So it's 2 minutes with the paddle, 2 minutes with the loop. And so he started with the paddle, and it was intense because every spanking I receive is pretty intense. And even the intensity just kind of added kind of that motivation for me to release all of those emotions. And as the spanking was happening, I'm obviously crying, I'm crying out, I'm experiencing the sensation of the spanking itself. Now, Kota has, we've talked about in a past podcast about how he doesn't mind when I talk during a spanking. I typically will apologize, or I will just express myself. I'm not allowed to ask him to stop. I'm not allowed to try to manipulate the spanking in any way, but he doesn't mind if I speak. And so I was, saying I'm sorry. And because I knew that I had stepped out of my role, I knew that I had taken over points of authority that were not mine, and I knew that I didn't do that on purpose, but I felt remorseful. I felt ashamed of myself that I let myself get into that position, because I really did know better. We've been at this long enough that I should have recognized what was happening before it got to that point. And so I felt ashamed of myself. I felt remorseful. So I was apologetic in that process. And as he finished the first kind of round with the paddle, because he does do one side at a time, I just broke down and I was like, I am sorry, I needed you. And he didn't respond to that right away. He typically doesn't talk back to me during a spanking. He lets me kind of experience what I need to experience and process what I need to process, and then we talk after. And so he finished up with the paddle on the other side. And I'm just a sobbing mess at this point. We're only halfway through. He did the loop, which is a minute on each side with that, and that felt super intense. It always does. I am always shocked at how intense that loop feels, especially after receiving the time with the paddle. Then moving on to the loop, I am always so shocked at how intense it feels. And so he delivers the loop, and I am just completely submitted to the process. Like, I was completely submitted to the process before we even started, but I was just sobbing. I was crying so hard. Typically, when Kota's done giving me a spanking, he will tell me that I'm allowed to get out of position when I am ready, and he will come and sit down. He used to kind of stand by me and kind of rub my back, but that wasn't necessarily something that I enjoyed. And so I expressed to him that I would really like that time to not have him around, not have him around, but I would like that time of just not being touched. Basically, I didn't need, like, it was almost distracting to my process for him to be rubbing my back. And so he comes and sits down, And I stood up out of position and I was just crying and I couldn't move. I was crying so hard, and I called out to him. I was like, I need you. And then so he came over to me, he hugged me, and I just kind of like collapsed in his arms. I was crying so hard. As soon as I could talk, we talked through it, and I'm like, I'm sorry, I needed you. And he expressed to me, he's like, you don't have to apologize for that. You are supposed to need me. And I think that that was the most emotional part of the whole experience, is that I felt like I wasn't allowed to need my head of household, my husband. And I absolutely am allowed to need him. It is completely within my role to depend on him, to need his leadership, to need his guidance, to just need him. And I felt like I didn't have access to him. And that was completely my fault for not communicating, for not reaching out, for not trying to say, hey, I need a little bit of connection here. I know you don't have a lot of time, but I need us to make some time here. And that was on me. I took his ability to be there for me away by not communicating. And that is why I needed that correction. I needed him to reestablish that connection. I needed him to correct the things that I was doing that were severing that connection. And I didn't mean to. It was completely unintentional. I was trying to be a good wife by not needing him, but that's not being a good wife. That's acting outside of my role. That's taking away his authority, but that's not what I meant to do at all. I really wanted to be a support to him by just taking care of everything so that he didn't have to worry about it. But by doing that, I was actually creating more problems between us. And he was right to step in and to correct those problems before they grew into real issues. He was right to correct my wrong thinking. He was right to step in and establish his authority in a tangible way so that I understood my position and my role, his position and his role, and I stopped acting in a way that didn't honor that. It really comes down to I needed to honor his position as the head of household, and the best way that I could do that was to let him be there for me, was to express how much I needed him to be there for me. So that is kind of the story about my last correction. It was, again, one of the most emotional corrections that I have ever had. I've probably had punishments that were that emotional, but typically corrections, I don't cry until after the correction is done. It just takes me a few minutes to process and then kind of have that emotional response. But this one was different because I went in with an emotional response and then I just felt that full process the entire time throughout the spanking. And so that was different. It was really intense. It was really an emotionally intense experience as well. And so I wanted to share that with you guys because it was just different, and it was something that kind of took me by surprise, but I can completely see why I had such a strong reaction to it looking back. And it ended up being, it's going to be a very beautiful memory for me because it showed the connection that Kota and I have, and it shows the ability for us to maintain our structures even through these busy seasons. And for so many years, we didn't have that. Our first several years through domestic discipline, anytime life got busy, things would absolutely fall apart. And I think that's why Kota was so intent on making sure that that didn't happen this time, because we are at a point in our relationship where these things should not be happening anymore. And he was going to make sure that he didn't let me go down that road. And so anyway, hope you enjoyed. Let me know what you think down below, and we will talk to you next time.